Today we're going to put this fine looking aluminum performance radiator from AlloyWorks in this 2000 Pontiac Bonneville. Now for today's radiator project, I'm going to use my three favorite tools: a hammer, a pipe wrench, and a chainsaw. The best tools to ever work on a car with. I built this engine for this Bonneville about a year and a half, 2 years ago, I think 2021, and we didn't go with a new radiator when we put it in. We couldn't find one at the time, but the customer wanted to go with a nice aluminum performance radiator, and of course I reached out to AlloyWorks and they had one for it. So let's take a look at the quality of the radiator and how well it fits in the car. Okay, the first thing you want to look for on any radiator, no matter which one you buy, is to make sure that it has these connectors for the transmission cooling lines, because it's a snap-in type fit. And then inspect all the welds. These are your mounting brackets that stick off the radiator. Make sure your petcock's in. You'll definitely want to go back and just make sure that it's tight, because sometimes they just stick them in. Because those fittings there are not tight, they'll have to be tightened up. And they even provide a nice brand new radiator cap. Okay, now your next step is you're going to want to make sure that the radiator matches before you try to stick it in. Make sure everything looks the same as far as brackets, fittings, position of nipples, and things like that. On these 10th generation body styles, you have to pull the upper radiator support, which makes it kind of a tight fit to slide the radiator down in there. So definitely want to make sure at the measurements that everything's going to fit. You want to measure your mounting studs to make sure that the width is the same on both radiators. It can vary about 1/4 inch. The rubber will give that much. As you can see, it's just about 1/4 inch variance between the two of them. So this should fit in there just fine. Plus the studs are tapered, so it'll kind of find its way in the hole. Then you want to make sure the width of the radiator is going to work. And I've already measured it. It looks like the old radiator is actually just a little bit wider than the new one, so that'll make the fit a little bit better. And you want to measure the height of the radiator. And I think these are actually almost a spot-on match. It's going to come out a really good match. It's not going to stick up too high or too little, so we're good. And then you're going to want to make sure that any place on the old radiator that has a clip, to try to pull them off and save them, because you can see in the new radiator it does not have a clip, so you want to put the clip on it, transfer it. And also look for things like this, little hooks, because if there are fans will go down into that. You'll notice on the original radiator, I'm sure this is probably for some other type of a cooling device or something on the car that this one doesn't come with, but this is the plug. It just has a little snap catch on there and plugs in that. You're going to want to transfer it and possibly go ahead and change O-ring out too while you're at it, and put it in the new one. And you'll see here again, you've got clips on the front side of the radiator that you're going to have to remove and put on to this. Okay, it's important, but these were not tight, so I went ahead and tightened them. These are 19 millimeters on this one, and 14 millimeter or a 9/16 on that petcock, and it was already tight. These I tightened up their O-ring seals. So now the next thing to do is to transfer those clips over to this radiator. Okay, the proper way to normally get the antifreeze out of this system is to pull all the plastic sheets off the bottom and stuff, which means you have to lay up underneath the car. And if it's still got the factory clips and stuff, but this one has been modified a few times and has other things in it, so it was actually just easier to reach down in here, undo the clamp, pull the hose, and put a big pan underneath to catch all the antifreeze. But that's up to you. You can do one or the other, but the petcock is on the bottom underneath all the plastic sheeting. Alright, we're just going to loosen these. remove these. It makes it real handy when you work on these cars to get you a magnetic cup. Slide these to the side. These are the mounts that hold the radiator in at the top. Pull this rubber off. All it does is stick down in the slot of the radiator. So the AlloyWorks radiator, it's actually really a performance radiator. It's a 3-core, where this one's just single core. And so it's going to be the exact width of this tank. So it's going to be all the way to here and here. Which will, when you mount it, it'll actually set your fans out just a little bit more towards the engine, but you've got plenty of room. It's not by much. It won't affect how the condenser fits in at all, because it sits to the outside of the tank. It's just something to make notice, so when you stick it in there, you're not going to like, oh no, it's not going to work. If you'll notice, these upper mounts for the to hold the radiator in, they are marked left and right. So if you do just happen to get them confused, know which side of the car is left and which side is the right, and it's based on when you're sitting in the car, not looking at the front. In order to get the bolts out for this upper radiator support, they're all going to come out fairly easy, but this box is in the way of probably these two because the bolts are so long. So we're going to have to remove this box. Or try to slide it out of the way. That may be enough to get it free. We'll try it here in a second. Bolts here are 15 millimeters. I didn't do anything elaborate except just kind of push the wiper filler tube out of the way. It's flexible enough. And you'll have to use a ratchet or wrench on it. As you can see, you can just play around with the repositioning of this without having to disconnect everything. It makes life a little bit easier. The only thing is, when you go back together, you want to make sure this seal, this foam seal, is back in place with this. At the very bottom, and hard to see, there's one 10 millimeter bolt you've got to undo that's got the line pinned to the, I think, the cooling fan shroud. Now, when doing little bolts like this, sometimes it's helpful if you get the right length extensions. Not everybody has a, whatever that is, an 1.5 inch length extension, but I'll try to find one and put down in the description when you get one. I got that loose. And the wires. Alright. You gotta have to unplug both fans, and it's got a clip, and the way that's all this plastic's in the way, you can't get your hand on that release, so it's best just to slide a screwdriver into the side. You don't know, real forcing, and just kind of twist a little bit to get it to release, and then pull. Now we're going to remove the fans and shroud. Just takes a little wiggling and jiggling to get it out. Now it's time to probably go ahead and disconnect the AC condenser. This one's going to be the funnest one to get to, this bolt here, because you can't see it and there's not a lot of room to actually get a ratchet or anything else on it. it helps to be able to push the radiator forward. That's why it's better to go ahead and remove the upper radiator support and everything get away, so you can actually push this thing around a little bit to get to the bolts. So the trick was just to get it. It'd actually help if you had somebody to help you push this radiator forward while you work the bolt, but it's just a matter of using your fingers and a ratchet until you actually get it out. This is going to be your hardest obstacle in the whole thing. Now once you get the condenser loose, you're going to have to lift it up, separate it from the radiator. You may have to do that a couple of times. It's out of it, but it'll probably catch you trying to pull it back out. In the factory, these usually have spring clips, and there's tools for that. Luckily, this one's already been changed out, so it helps if you got a nice long extension and a swivel socket, but the screwdriver will work as well. It doesn't have to come off, you just got to have it where it just gets out of the way. Cooling lines could be your next obstacle. It's got a little plastic shield that covers up the clips. And there's a tool made for this, but you can either use the tool or you can use a pick or a screwdriver to get these loose. You want to try to slide these back without tearing them up, because they do kind of help protect that connection. Man, I hate working this driveway. Put a clamp on this hose right here, because this jug is higher than the radiator basically, so if you undo this, it's going to empty the jug out all over the place. So I'll put this clamp to pinch the hose off. It's actually made for hoses to pinch them off. Now we're going to remove the radiator. I was drilling. Once you get in, you might be able to go with it. Go ahead and film. Now putting this one in is going to be a little bit harder due to the fact that this aluminum radiator is not going to flex and give like the plastic one did. Make sure your condenser's in the slot, which I don't think it is on this one, is it? There it goes. This bolt's going to be the hardest one to get in, so it might be easier to use a magnet to hold it while you're trying to get it in the hole. With this radiator being aluminum like it is, it's not flexible like that plastic one, so therefore it makes it harder to get the bolts in and out. Yeah, now with the wider radiator in, you can still see it's got finger clearance between the two. The most it's going to do is push the cooling fans towards the engine some, but not by much, enough to make a difference.
You'll want to push in the lower transmission cooling line before you put the radiator hose on. It's really hard. These are very difficult to push in. After you get the lower cooling line for the transmission connected, go ahead and connect up the radiator hose here and put your clamp on and tighten it. You'll want to do this before you put the fan shroud, because otherwise it's going to be really hard to get to. Next, you're going to want to go ahead and get that upper transmission cooling line put in. You just have to push it until it snaps in, and then it's good.
Put the, don't forget to put your protector over it.
Next, you want to connect your coolant reservoir bottle hose to the radiator.
Next step is to put the electric fan and shroud back in.
It turns out that the only complication with this is the radiator fan shroud will have to be modified to fit this larger size radiator.
The factory fan shroud, this bottom lip sticks out a little bit too far and will have to be cut off probably about 1/4 of an inch for these pieces here to slide into the little hooks on the radiator.
Now I'm using a pneumatic cutoff wheel here, but you can use an electric one. There's several different means of way of cutting this with different type saws, but it's plastic, it's pretty easy to cut, and what I'm cutting off is very minuscule, so it's not really going to hurt anything. The radiator itself could probably be bought with the fans, because AlloyWorks does sell the radiators with fans, so that's something that's an option. So we want to go ahead and use the factory setup. You can see here how much was cut off. Is, like I said, is about 1/4 of an inch, and that allowed the hooks to catch on the fan shroud.
To be a high performance radiator, we actually I think ordered a single core, but I think this is the only thing they had was a 3-core, which will give this car a lot of cooling ability. But because of that, I had to space. I had to put a nut to make a spacer to keep the fan shroud from bumping into the actual fins of the radiator. Of course, you can also just cut this. It's up to you, whatever one you want to do. It doesn't hurt either way. It still pulls the air just fine. No matter if you do use an electric or a pneumatic air ratchet or electric ratchet or cordless or whatever, always go back over your bolts by hand, make sure they're correctly tightened.
Don't forget to hook up the electric connectors on the fans. You might need those.
Is the factory radiator has a little groove in this, and this snaps into it. This lays here. This doesn't have anything to hold it, so the solution would be put black weather strip adhesive on it and just let it stick to it to hold it in place. It's not going to go anywhere anyways, but just for extra precautions. There'd be a radiator there now. On the 3.8 system, the way water can get, the coolant can get trapped in the block, they provided a bleed screw at the top. So when it starts to get warm, you can put the cap on and then crack the bleed screw, and you'll hear a lot of air come out. And you may have to repeat this several times of putting antifreeze in it, let air come out, put antifreeze in it, until it just has a steady stream of antifreeze coming out, then you can close it off. It's you have to hold the bigger side with a 10mm wrench, and that's a 7mm.
As you can see, even after installation and the modifications to the fan shroud, it looks as factory as it did before we even started. I thought the radiator fit in there very, very, very excellent. Put in aftermarket radiators that didn't fit in this good. This one actually slid down in there better. It looks better. It's a bigger core radiator, definitely going to allow better cooling functionality. Overall, other than the modifications I had to do to the fan shroud and that top rubber piece, this was actually a really great job. And actually, if we had got the radiator with the fan shrouds already made into it, it wouldn't have been an issue at all. But even what we had to do was no problem whatsoever. I have put many of these AlloyWorks brand radiators, or aluminum radiators, in vehicles. And one thing I'm really impressed with is every one of them comes with a billet aluminum made radiator cap, and they're great. I think some of the poundage on them is some high, but I think this car actually came with a 19-pound cap from factory, so that's one reason why they did that. I've put some on trucks. I think some of those were rated at 16 or 17, so they do match the poundage per the vehicle. So that's pretty much how you put a radiator in a 2000 Pontiac Bonneville or these 10th generation body styles. The job wasn't that bad. It took about an hour, maybe an hour and 15 minutes, something like, to do the whole job. I also wanted to make note of the performance. Now, in this case, this radiator that was in it was leaking. It was, it had been in there for many miles and it was leaking. So just adding a new radiator is a big difference. But the temperature gauge usually would run about a half, maybe just a little over a half. I think it was reading 200. And now that we've put this radiator in it, he's driven it for about a week. He hasn't brought it back to me for me to video the gauge. That's one bad thing about doing these things for customers, is I don't always have access to the cars after I work on them. But he's telling me now that it's sitting right below the half mark, 200. So, and he drives it regularly and drives it hard sometimes. So this radiator is doing a whole lot better than the original radiator. These AlloyWorks radiators, they are great. Like I said, I haven't had one yet that's come back or has been a problem. They fit great. They look great. So I highly recommend them. And for every tool or product or anything that I've been talking about or even recommending in this video, be sure to look down in the description. A lot of people will send me comments asking about what I said or where do you get this. Everything that I've talked about that you could possibly buy or look for is down in the description. And right now, if you order an AlloyWorks radiator, if you use the discount code RODRADS, that's what I'll put down in the description, you can get a discount on the radiator. So I hope you found this video helpful, and if you have any questions, be sure to leave me a comment, and be sure to subscribe, because I'm always coming up with something new and fun to work on. See you in the next one.